Welcome to the Underground.
Turn me up, bitch!
My Little Underground with Peter A.
It's My Little Underground. I'm Peter A. Make sure you're subscribed anywhere you get podcasts and follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at MLU Pod. And you can also follow me, Peter A, on Twitter and Instagram at itspeter_A. Now, before we get into our very incredible topic today, and I'll give you more details in a little bit, I have to address the rather large elephant in the room, so to speak, and that's the recent deaths of, well, yes, deaths, plural, but one in particular, the recent death of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police. And it's a here we go again situation. You know, we've been here so many times. You know, I can do a whole other podcast just listening to names of people that have died by the hands of the police over the past 2 or 3 years or so. And this one is just, it's like, we're just sick of it. You know what I mean? And now we have people rioting and protesting in the wake of a global pandemic because we're just sick of it. You know, especially black people. We're just sick of seeing, you know, hashtag after hashtag, name after name of people that look like us. You know, and like the Foo Fighters said, it's times like these time and time again, and that's true for us. It's true for people that look like me. You know, you can't even go out for a jog without being hunted down. You know, so I see people torching police cars and burning down buildings. You know why? Because we're just angry. We're just sick of it. It's just when you let things fester and fester and you don't change anything, it's going to explode. People are going to explode because we're just sick of it. You know, and what do we do to change it? I mean, there's nothing me as a black person can do anymore because it's hard enough just to exist. You know, and this is an election year. So I think whoever is running for president, and even the smaller, the congressional and our local politicians, our local representatives, there needs to be written policy, I don't care if it's an amendment or whatever, that is going to hold law enforcement accountable for the pointless deaths of black men and women too. That's it. That's it. Everyone's saying, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is. That's the answer. You know, the people, we're tired. We've done enough. We protested enough. It's time to change. Whoever is in charge of making laws, our policymakers, there needs to be change. That's it. We need to hold these people accountable. And the people that are in charge of this country should be absolutely disgusted by this, because it's not the first time. And the bad apple argument, completely out the window. It's not just a few bad apples. It's not an individual cop. When people say fuck the police, it's not you, an individual police officer, you're the part of the problem. No, it's the system. It's the system in place. Our police department, the police in the United States as a whole system is fucked. It's fucked up. And there's not anything anyone's really doing to change. People need to be held accountable. That's it. Today on My Little Underground, we're going to go back in time a little bit, 10 years to 2010, and talk about some of the albums and some ideas from some of these records that have aged well in 10 years. And there are a lot. Tons. So we have a lot to get to, so let's get started. I want to start with a handful of great black genre benders that dropped albums in 2010, and there are tons of them. And I want to start with Kid Cudi because his Man on the Moon 2 album came out, and I listened to this album quite a bit when it came out. And looking back at it 10 years later, it does age well. And my opinion definitely changed a little bit because there was a period of time where I was pretty upset with Kid Cudi. I don't know why. I don't remember why. I think some of his later albums just wasn't, that interesting. And I listened to Man on the Moon again, and I was like, oh my God, why did I ever like this? But there were some great ideas on it, but just at the time I was just so angry. And then I saw him live, and I'm thinking, whoa, like people really still care about Kid Cudi. And I still cared about Kid Cudi. I still liked his albums, but listening to it at that time, this was like 3 or 4 years ago, I'm like, oh my God, I'm sick of this. But recently listening to it, especially right after Kids See Ghosts came out, I'm like, this album does age well. There are a lot of great ideas on this project, especially Maniac with Cage. In this song, talk about genre bending, samples St. Vincent, specifically the song Strangers, which I absolutely love. And I don't know any rappers, especially in 2010, that were sampling St. Vincent, so kudos to you, Kid Cudi. And this album was definitely very, very influential. And Travis Scott and the late Juice WRLD were vocal about their love and admiration for Mr. Cudi. And speaking of, genre bending, well, this album is the genre benders of genre benders, at least for this time. Erase Me with Kanye West. And this song, looking back at it, it's a little corny. It's a little cheesy. But it's very catchy and it ages surprisingly well. And this song, it's a full-blown rock song with some rap verses, with Kanye West rapping. That's it. You could have played this on any rock station at the time. Really? I think so. Go back and listen to it. I'm not crazy. And this entire album was it had a lot of, indie rock influence on it. Something that a lot of rappers weren't doing. There was another rapper that dropped an album this year that had a little indie rock influence, which we'll get to in a second. And that man is Mr. Bobby Ray himself, B.o.B. 10 years ago, he dropped his debut full-length B.o.B. The Adventures of Bobby Ray. And this record, along the lines of Cudi's record, had an indie rock influence, but B.o.B. dove more into the pop realm and mixed it in with the Atlanta hip-hop flavor that was continuing to boom around this period, which we'll definitely talk about later. Now, what I loved about this album is that he collaborated with rock stars to make massive and amazing pop tunes. One of them is Magic with Rivers Cuomo of Weezer, and Airplanes with Hayley Williams of Paramore. And these two records were big. Well, Airplanes was the biggest, and I was kind of annoyed with this song because I heard it so many times, but it is a good album. It's a great song. It is. And Magic with Rivers Cuomo, I remember hearing it in a commercial. It's a beautiful, simple pop tune with a great chorus, with a great melody, some great verses from B.o.B. It fits so well. It was a pop record and it had some hip hop flavor and the styles didn't clash one bit. It was a perfect fit. And Q-Tip famously said, rap is not pop. If you call it that, then stop. But you know what? I have to disagree, man. Especially around this time period. Hip hop was taking over the pop world and it's become embedded in pop culture. There's been so many great rap tunes around this time period, before that and after, that were the hottest songs in the whole country. So rap is pop music. Pop music is not a dirty word. And again, speaking of great genre benders, this record had a pseudo cover of The Kids Don't Stand a Chance from Vampire Weekend. And B.o.B.'s version, The Kids, featured Janelle Monae. And this was the first time I've ever heard Janelle Monae in a song. And they did a hell of a job with this tune. Again, another example of hip-hop tune mixing with indie rock to make this kind of pop result, which I love. It's great. And 10 years later, it still sounds amazing. And we'll talk about Janelle Monae in a second because she had quite a 2010. And her album Arc Android came out, and it's about Cindy Mayweather, an android sent back in time to free the citizens of the fictional Metropolis from the Great Divide, a secret society that uses time travel to suppress freedom and love. And this record, my God, it was very creative. Very, very creative. It blends show tunes, funk, soul, punk, and hip-hop. Like, I don't know any other album that has Big Boy and Of Montreal on the same album. Really. Just another example of a great black genre benders. Like, I love it. Like, this is the year that black artists aren't afraid to do music that's not really, you know, you would associate with black people. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. Music is music. It's just about the art and the artist making it. That's it. Like, it doesn't matter what genre that you're doing. It doesn't matter as long as your ideas are executed well. Who gives a shit? A good song is a good song. And more specifically, I want to talk about "Come Alive." This track is a standout on this album. Has a lot of Afro punk, swing. It's just, oh man, it's beautiful. You have to hear it. It's amazing. It's like it's like a punk record that you would hear in Broadway, you know? And this whole album, The Arc Android, it is Broadway in album form. For those that are kind of, you know, missing Broadway and, you know, we can't have Broadway right now because of everything that's going on with COVID, listen to this album. You'll get your Broadway fix, definitely. And now the big cheese of 2010, I would say, is Mr. Drake. Yeah. His official debut album came out in 2010, Thank Me Later. This was a monster debut album. And you know what? I'm not the biggest Drake fan, but, you know, real recognize real. You know, this album was everywhere. You know, and again, this album had a lot of great ideas too. You know, another great genre-bending album. Hip-hop, pop, R&B, soul, whatever. It was all blended together on this project. And I think Drake is cut from the cloth of like a Lauryn Hill and a Mos Def. You know, two great genre benders of their time too. And I think Drake is the type of artist that got more popular with each album that he put out. You know, like this album was huge, but Take Care was also huge. And if you're reading this is too late, a couple of years after that, that was also huge. And Scorpion recently, that was massive. You know, you got to respect Drake's continued presence in not only the hip hop sphere, but in the pop world as well. You know, you got to give it up to him. And I remember in high school, like this was a soundtrack to my junior and senior year. Because I remember when this album first came out, you know, I was leaving for a final and Toy Story just came out, Toy Story 3. And I heard some people playing the new Drake album from their car. More specifically, I heard Up All Night with Nicki Minaj. And hearing that song, I'm like, wow. You know, I was kind of on the fence about Drake. I didn't know if I hated him or liked him, you know. He had some good songs, but, you know, I just didn't love him as much as some of my classmates did. And this tune, man, this album had some pretty catchy tunes on here. You know, I didn't love all of the album, yeah, but there were some good ideas on it. Like the aforementioned Up All Night with Nicki Minaj. A great beat, really great hook. Perfect for driving. Perfect for cars. And again, you know, a lot of great genre bending on here too. He had a great mix of R&B and pop tunes. For example, Fireworks with Alicia Keys, Find Your Love, and the great rap tunes like Light Up with Jay-Z, you know, Getting Up All Night. Miss Me with Lil Wayne, definitely one of my favorites on this album. It has a verse from Lil Wayne reporting from jail. You know, he says, I'll be gone to November, but something, I know Drizzy's gonna kill him or something like that. I really like the album closer too, Thank Me Now. It's a little braggadocious, but it's great. It's just really good. It's just kind of what hip-hop is. Hip-hop is very braggadocious, and you know, Drake had every right to be braggadocious because his album was a hit. You know, it was all hits. This album was all hits. Even if you don't love Drake, like myself, I'm not the I'm not the biggest fan of Drake. You won't see me at a Drake concert, but this tune had some slappers, and Drake still 10 years later is still a force in hip hop and in the pop world. You have to respect it. And does this album? I think this is one of his best albums, in my opinion. This is one of the few Drake albums that I really enjoyed, and that's coming from a non-Drake fan. And like I said earlier, Atlanta was, continuing to become a force in hip hop. And with Waka Flocka's Flockavelli album, my God, this album was everywhere, just like Drake. I think this is one of the most important hip hop albums of the decade because Flocka and Gucci, but more specifically, I think this album pushed the trap sound further into the mainstream. And a year before this, Gucci had Lemonade, but I think Lex Luger, the producer, and not the wrestler, and Flocka definitely helped push the trap into the mainstream and into the party. More specifically with No Hands with Roscoe Dash and Wale. Every party that I attended between 2010 and 2011 had this song there. Every one. Every single one. And this is another one of those songs. When I was in high school, my mentality was if I heard the song too much, therefore it sucks. If it's everywhere, it sucks. But this song, it's a great song. It's a great song. Not only as a party song, but it's a great song to listen to. Great beat, great chorus. It had everything. And how can I forget Hard in the Paint? This song, again, was everywhere. And it had tons of internet parodies. And yeah, like this was just, again, this is a trap song for real. Like a very hard Lex Luger beat. And it was super, super popular because, again, you had artists like OJ the Juice Man, who was dominating like the mixtape world, but he didn't have like a big mainstream hit. He didn't. And here comes Flocka with No Hands, everywhere, all over every party. Like I've had people come up to me at parties, to tell me to ask the DJ to play No Hands, as if like, yes, I'm a black man and the DJ just so happens to be black. Therefore, we have this language and this understanding. Like he'll do what I say. Like that's another podcast, right? Another day. But that's what happened. That's how popular this song was, But not just Hard in the Paint, No Hands. And I think in 2010, 2011, the producer on this, Lex Luger, ended up producing a lot of hits for Jay-Z, Rick Ross, Lil Wayne, Kanye West, Gucci, and Snoop Dogg even. This trap sound, not only just became a force in hip hop, and 10 years later, it's still prevalent. In 2014, Flocka teamed up with what they called a trap group in the EDM world, Yellow Claw. They did a song together called Trap Going Techno. In the hook, Flocka goes, "My trap went techno," meaning his trap sound took over the electronic world too. That's how important Flockavelli was. Songs like Hard in the Paint, No Hands. It infiltrated not only the hip hop world, but the pop world and the very white, dance world, the European dance world too. So, yeah, and listening as a whole, Flockavelli, the album, sonically, it ages well because you hear a lot of that element in today's hip hop music. But I think Flocka had a different energy. He almost had like a punk rock energy to his music that a lot of artists that kind of dive into the trap sound now kind of have this hazy, almost atmospheric sound to them. They're not like shouting in your face, but they're just kind of just riding along with the beat, which is nothing wrong. It's just different. It's not wrong. It's just, it's different. I think artists like Future, Migos, Gunna, Lil Baby, Young Thug, all owe a lot to Flockavelli. I don't know what like the Atlanta hip hop sound would be without this album. I mean, there was other great Atlanta, stuff from Outkast and T.I., Goody Mob. They all pushed Atlanta forward, but Flocka just kind of elevated even further. He put it even further. He just continued to what the great Atlanta artists of the past have helped set up. Moving on to Nas and Damian Marley, they put out Distant Relatives. I mean, aside from Illmatic and It Was Written, this is one of the best albums that Nas has ever put out. It's Illmatic, it's It Was Written, and it's Distant Relatives. If someone were to ask me, what is a Nas album I should listen to that's not Illmatic? This is it. This is definitely it. And this album, it showcases Nas and Damian's great chemistry, and because they have two totally different styles. Damian Marley is, a reggae artist, Nas hip hop. They came together so well. And reggae and hip hop have worked together very well. When you listen to KRS-One's Return of the Boom Bap, there's a lot of dancehall reggae elements in that music. And if you listen to the BDP Worldwide live album, KRS is rapping over a dancehall reggae beat. So this is not a strange connection. It's, it actually makes sense. And again, this album is a genre-bending epic. Especially songs like Nah Mean, you have Nas's raw hip-hop ability, and you have Damian Marley's reggae amazing epicness. It just comes together so well. It's like, it's unbelievable. It's like chicken nuggets to honey mustard. That's that's how great they sound together. This is an album to check out, and 10 years later, it's still great. This album also has one of my favorite verses from Lil Wayne on My Generation. It's totally different from anything you would expect Lil Wayne to do, especially around this time. A must listen. Definitely check that out. And speaking of the kings of genre bending, The Roots. They dropped an album in 2010, How I Got Over, and like typical Roots fashion, you have jazz, blues, R&B, hip-hop, and rock and roll influences all in one. On the same album, you have John Legend and the Monsters of Folk, which is a supergroup of Jim James of My Morning Jacket, Conor Oberst, and M. Ward. And this was, again, another example of artists blending genres together that just fit perfectly. One of the standouts on his album, Dear God 2.0, featuring the Monsters of Folk, a 10-year-old song with a topic and a theme that's still relevant today. And it sounds to me like Black Thought is looking for answers to the issues in society through God. The whole song, he's just asking questions. And it's like today, black folks are looking for answers to all the recent police killings of, black men and women. And he has this very depleted tone. And it's a gorgeous tune. It's so great. And on the very same album, we have Doing It Again, another one of my favorites on this, featuring John Legend. And this song is the complete opposite of Dear God. We have fierce verses from Black Thought. He starts with the whole song, rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Oh my God. Dear God, he's very depleted, and it's almost like he's given up. But this one, he's rising up out of that darkness. The Roots, man, they're still doing it. They were still doing it. They're still making timeless albums. At that time, almost 20 years into their career. Amazing stuff. And I think in the beginning of the 2010s, there was, let me go back a little bit. In the early 2000s, there was a lot of bands that were labeled as, revivalists, like the White Stripes, the Strokes. They were looked at as throwback bands because they were influenced by, I guess, early garage and punk groups. And they weren't doing, the new new metal-esque sound that was dominating, the rock world at that time. They were just kind of going back to a simpler foundation of what rock music is. And even deep within the underground, when those bands like the White Stripes, Strokes, they became superstars. In the underground, at least in the late 2000s, there was the beginning, the genesis of a kind of second wave, another revival, if you will, of the shoegaze sound from the 80s and 90s. And a little bit of the twee sound from the early 90s, and a lot of the C86 stuff that was popping in the late 80s in the underground. There's a lot of bands that had the influence of bands like Black Tambourine, The House of Love, Jesus and Mary Chain, and the Vaselines, and a lot of early shoegaze bands like Cocteau Twins, My Bloody Valentine, Ride, and Lush. All these bands had an amazing influence on a lot of indie bands in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And I think a lot of these bands from the 90s, they kind of helped form the formation of the Ravenettes, A Place to Bury Strangers, Beach House, Tame Impala, and M83, and new rising stars like Gateway Drugs and No Joy. And actually in the 2010s, there was a band that, they put out 2 albums, but they had a lot of influence of all the bands I just named. The History of Apple Pie. One of my favorite bands from that time period that sadly broke up silently. And yeah, it was just part of, in the 2010s, there was a whole lot of other noise pop and shoegaze bands that were popping up. And there were 2 bands in particular that I want to discuss today that put out albums in the 2010. And I'm not going to say that these 2 bands were like the foundation of the revival of this sound. It just so happens that there was, again, a period of time in the early 2010s, there were just a lot of bands that were just inspired by this sound. And one of those are the Dum Dum Girls. They put out their debut album, I Will Be, 10 years ago. And Dum Dum Girls started as a bedroom project of Kristen Dee Gundred, who now performs as Kristen Control. And if you go back to level 31 of My Little Underground, I have an interview with Kristen, or Dee Dee at the time, from 2015. And this was right after one of her last performances as Dee Dee. And this was at the Moscot in Delancey, on Delancey Street in Lower Manhattan. Definitely go check that out. Level 31 of My Little Underground. And Dum Dum Girls were named after, very inspired by the Vaselines' 1989 debut album, Dum Dum. Just shows you, their influence. And this particular album had a lot of surf-like, lo-fi, noisy, but bright pop melodies and pop tunes on here. And one of my favorites on here is Jail La La. Has a very infectious set of la-las that will get stuck in your head. Beautiful stuff from the Dum Dum Girls. Love that group. Miss them dearly. And I had no idea who the Dum Dum Girls were in 2010. I got into them in college a few years, like 2 or 3 years after this album came out. And, listening to it 10 years later, again, it's not the most, innovative album in the world, but it's beautiful, it's noisy, it's lo-fi, but there's a lot of groups that make a lot of lo-fi stuff today it just sounds like it's, it's just unprofessional. Not unprofessional, it's a bad word. It's underproduced just because. If I don't, I guess unprofessional is a great way to put it. There's groups that underproduce their music on purpose, just for an aesthetic. But I think Dum Dum Girls did that very well. They had a very lo-fi, noisy, hazy sound to their music that just kind of sounds like summer and the beach, but like with a punk twist. Great stuff. And another group that definitely dove into the shoegaze influence is A Sunny Day in Glasgow. And their album, Autumn, again came out in 2010. This was their third album from the Philly shoegaze group. And if you go back to level 4 of My Little Underground, I interviewed Jen Goma, who is the current lead singer of A Sunny Day in Glasgow. And if you look at the cover of Autumn again, it says Pop Songs 2010. And that's exactly what you get. Exactly. Very lush, reverb heavy, noisy pop tunes. Very shoegaze inspired. They kind of picked up from where My Bloody Valentine and Cocteau Twins left off. And one thing I will say about Sunny Day in Glasgow, yes, they're very shoegaze inspired, but they don't directly rip off My Bloody Valentine, Slow Dive, Lush and Ride. They don't. They have a different way of writing songs, a lot more synths, and their arrangements are very frantic, and it kind of forces you to listen in and pay attention, especially on a song like How Does Somebody Say When They Like You. It has a very infectious refrain, chopped up drums, and constant rhythm changes that are just fucking gorgeous. And it kind of keeps you on your toes. Like, the first time I heard this album, everything went one ear and out the other. And then I listened to it again, I'm like, whoa, I kind of missed that. It on paper, the first time you listen to it, you might think this is just like ambiance. That's what I thought when I first heard Sunny Day in Glasgow. It's just like in the background, it's hazy, it's shoegaze, and it's cool or whatever. But I didn't really pay attention to what they were doing with the songs. I wasn't paying attention to the arrangements until like I kept listening to them. And I'm like, wow, they're really doing a lot of interesting things here. It just like the song kind of bounces back and forth. You know what I mean? But beautiful stuff. And it's kind of a stress reliever to listen to them. If you're feeling stressful, put on A Sunny Day in Glasgow. You'll feel better. Really. At least for me. And if you're driving around at night, this is perfect. Perfect music to listen to. So there was one group that put out an album in 2010 that was kind of starting to take over the pop world, and that group is the Black Keys. They put out Brothers, and this album was just a result of 8 years of grinding, licensing songs to movies, TVs, and recording in drummer Pat Carney's basement, and they finally broke through the mainstream. And this album gave them 2 gold singles, and the entire album was platinum by 2012. And Rolling Stones even named Tighten Up one of the best whistling songs. And they got the Grammy for Best Rock Performance. And this song, Tighten Up, was all over the media. Gossip Girl, soundtrack for FIFA, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, movies, commercials. And the other hit from this song, Howlin' For You, again, commercials and movies, TV shows like Deadpool the movie, CSI Miami, Entourage, and even the Toronto Blue Jays used it as their home run song for a little while too. And this album was more pop leaning, but it still had a lot of blues influence from their earlier albums, but it just wasn't as raw. It just wasn't, lo-fi, if you will. Some people are critical of that, but I think it was a step in the right direction. They couldn't make songs that sounded like they were made in the 60s forever. They can't do that forever, And songs like She's Long Gone, Next Girl, and The Go-Getter, very glossy, has a little sheen to it, but it still had that blues energy to it that I fucking love. And I think this album and the Black Keys, commercial success of the 2010s definitely laid the blueprint to the sound of modern alternative rock radio. There's a lot of groups that you hear on alternative radio that kind of sound like they're trying to do their own version of later Gold on the Ceiling, Tighten Up, songs in that kind of, in the Black Keys kind of song structure. For real, if you really listen to alternative radio, I hear a lot of that shit. I hear a lot of people trying to recreate what the Black Keys have done. Hey, you can't argue with you can't be mad at that because they became very successful. The Black Keys' formula, their sound, their bluesy sound mixed with pop tunes really helped them break to the mainstream. So I understand why people wanted to copy their formula. Just let's listen closely. I'm not crazy. There's a lot of groups that tried to do what they did. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just kind of pointing it out. Mr. Kanye West. Oh yeah. He had quite the 2010 with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. This album was like a hip-hop symphony. Tons of guests from all genres. We had Jay-Z, Pusha T, Fergie, Raekwon, Elton John, Rick Ross, John Legend, Rihanna, and Bon Iver even. He tapped into the widest array of people from all over the music world. And I think it's incredible. It's probably my favorite Kanye album. It's not, it is genre bending. It is, but not as much as like what Kid Cudi did. And that was very sharp. And Janelle Monae and, even Drake to a degree. But, the artists that he sampled here from a wide array. He even sampled King Crimson on Power, which is crazy. Really cool. And this album had sharp production. And it was very, very theatric as well. The intro, Dark Fantasy, Nicki Minaj kind of setting the scene for the album in a horrible British accent. and then there's a choir that opens the song, and then it turns into this like hip-hop fireworks show. Incredible stuff. And another one of my favorite tracks, Gorgeous. Kanye has this distorted vocals throughout the whole song, and it kind of just talks about what it's like to be black in America, and it has an incredible hook from Kid Cudi, and Raekwon sneaks in out of nowhere with these gorgeous piano licks right below his vocals. Great stuff here. And here's another song that it was impossible to avoid if you went to a party, and that's Monster. And this song has a very famous Nicki Minaj verse that I think is better. This verse is better than all of Nicki Minaj's albums. Yep. Oh yeah. And then there's So Appalled, which is kind of just a lyrical excursion with Jay-Z, Pusha T, and Sahai the Prince. Amazing stuff here. And then you have RZA that comes in at the very end, out of nowhere. It's amazing. Great stuff. And this year we also heard from Mr. Ty Segall. He put out his third album, Melted. And again, this was his third album, but I think this was the beginning for Ty. Because his first two albums, his first self-titled album from 2008 and Lemons a year later, were just straight noisy garage punk, similar to what Jay Retard was doing at the time. And Melted, I think, is one of it showcases the sharpest songwriting and arranging, but the noise is still there, but the songs are incredible. Songs like Caesar, for example. Like the first half is like a garage rock clinic, noisy, fuzzy guitars, distorted vocals. But then towards the second half of the song, it turns into this, this beautifully acoustic guitar strumming, and that rolls into like a rolling thunder of piano licks and this kind of spastic flute that closes the song out. It's unpredictable. And this was the beginning of Ty Segall kind of just going left field and just kind of pulling out new and creative ideas that you wouldn't hear from whoever you think he was, inspired by or trying to revive, so to speak. And then we have the Dead Weather. Oh my God. Sea of Cowards. This is the second album from the supergroup, made up of Jack White, Alison Mosshart, and Dean Fertitta. And Jack White, obviously, of the White Stripes. Alison Mosshart, The Kills. Dean Fertitta, Queens of the Stone Age. Mr. Jack Lawrence from Raconteurs. And this group is it's angry blues. It's like a bunch of punks gathered and started listening to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. That's exactly what the Dead Weather is. You know, songs like No Horse, some of the best riffs you'll ever hear. Incredible stuff. And then you have like Alison Moshart's battle cry-like vocals, and she just kind of breaks into insanity by the end of the tune. And I think Jack and Allison have just amazing chemistry, amazing vocal chemistry here, especially on Die by the Drop. My God, it is, again, some of the best guitar. Like on the White Stripes material, there was some great riffs on there, and I think that those ideas kind of continued with the Dead Weather. And I think that of all of Jack White's post Stripes projects, the Dead Weather is my favorite. I hold the Dead Weather above the Raconteurs and his solo material that I think is underrated, in my opinion. So, 10 years of the Dead Weather, Sea of Cowards, ages like a fine wine. And I said that 5 years ago in 2015. It definitely aged well, too. Then I was saying, yeah, it definitely aged well. And here we are, 10 years later. Amazing stuff. Going into New York's underground hip-hop scene, Ill Bill put out Kill Devil Hills with DJ Muggs of Cypress Hill. And if you don't know, Ill Bill is part of the very well-respected and legendary underground New York hip-hop group Nonfiction. And this is part of DJ Muggs' Versus series. You know, he did a series of albums with the likes of Jizza and recently Rock Marciano as well. So anyway, yeah, Kill Devil Hills. Creative album. Great production, great aura, aesthetic, and it's like classic underground hip hop, classic New York underground hip hop blended with a heavy metal influence, and it has high levels of paranoia. It's all about alien invasions and defending yourself against the corrupt government, and it was kind of a tribute to his late uncle Howie as well. This is an album that definitely ages well, and there was nothing like it. There was no album that sounded like that in 2010. Underground, mainstream, unbelievable stuff. Definitely worth a listen. It's not for everybody, I mean, but it's a hip hop's hip hop album. If you were a true appreciator of hip hop, there's no way you wouldn't at least give this album a chance. And that does it for 2010. A great year for music, great year for black genre benders, and a great year for shoegaze revivalists. And there's a lot of great albums that came out in 2010 that definitely aged well going into the 2020s. It's My Little Underground. I'm Peter A. Make sure you're subscribed on all podcast platforms and follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at MLU Pod, and you can follow me, Peter A, on Twitter and Instagram at itspeter_A. Later days.